What if I told you that your availability, your constant yes to others, is quietly erasing who you really are? In a world that worships productivity, connection, and responsiveness, we rarely question the cost of being endlessly accessible. We answer texts at midnight, agree to obligations we resent, and stretch ourselves thin in relationships that drain us. But what if the act of always being available is the very thing keeping you from your deepest truth? Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist and philosopher, believed that wholeness begins the moment we turn inward, when we stop living as masks for others and begin the terrifying, liberating work of becoming ourselves. This is not about withdrawal from life, it's about a return to yourself. In this video we explore what happens when you step back, set boundaries, and stop being perpetually available to everyone but yourself. We'll dive into Jung's concepts of individuation, the shadow and the self, to understand why everything begins to shift. Relationships, emotions, identity. The moment you stop showing up for everyone else and finally show up for you. Jung's concept of individuation and authenticity. Central to Jung's philosophy is the process of individuation, a lifelong journey toward becoming one's true self. Jung believed that individuals must differentiate themselves from collective identities, expectations, and societal roles in order to become whole. This process requires introspection and, crucially, time alone. By ceasing to be overly available to others, emotionally, mentally, and physically, an individual creates the space necessary for self-exploration. Jung asserted that individuals often remain trapped in personas, social masks adopted to navigate the expectations of family, culture, and institutions. Availability, especially when habitual and uncritical, reinforces these masks. For example, a person who is constantly available to meet others' emotional needs may internalize the role of the caretaker and neglect their own needs in the process. When such a person begins to say no, withdraws from social obligations, or sets boundaries, their authentic self starts to emerge. This process, though uncomfortable, is essential to individuation. The power of boundaries. One of the most significant ways that stopping availability changes everything is through the establishment of boundaries. Jung understood boundaries not as barriers to relationships but as necessary structures that protect and define the self. He warned against enmeshment and the loss of individuality in relationships. When people are too available, they often blur the lines between their own needs and the needs of others. This can result in resentment, emotional exhaustion, and the inability to discern one's true desires. In Jungian therapy, the development of the self requires a clear separation from the other. Emotional boundaries help to establish this separation. Once a person begins to enforce boundaries, by not answering every call, declining unnecessary obligations, or refusing to engage in emotionally draining interactions, they begin to change the relational dynamics around them. Others may react with confusion or resistance, but the individual's inner world gains coherence and strength. Furthermore, Jung emphasized the archetype of the wise old man or wise woman, figures who often withdraw from society to gain insight and perspective. Their wisdom comes not from constant availability, but from intentional solitude. In embracing this archetype, modern individuals can reclaim their psychological sovereignty. The shadow and unconscious expectations. Another core Jungian concept relevant to this theme is the shadow, the unconscious aspect of the personality that contains repressed desires, instincts, and fears. Much of what drives over-availability stems from shadow elements, such as the fear of rejection, the need for validation, or the avoidance of loneliness. When someone decides to stop being constantly available, they often confront the uncomfortable contents of their shadow. Questions like, "Will I still be loved if I'm not always there?" Or "What am I avoiding by staying busy?" arise. Jung believed that confronting the shadow is essential for psychological growth. Through this confrontation, individuals uncover the unconscious motivations behind their behavior and can choose to live more consciously and intentionally. This process of shadow integration, facing what we fear in ourselves, leads to empowerment. When a person stops seeking external affirmation and turns inward, they reclaim agency. They are no longer puppets to unconscious drives, but authors of their own lives. This self-possession can be unsettling to others who are used to the individual's availability and compliance. But it also inspires respect and authenticity. Change in relationships and social dynamics. The most visible transformation that occurs when one stops being perpetually available is the shift in interpersonal relationships. Jung highlighted the importance of genuine relationships, those based on mutual respect and individuation, rather than dependency or projection. When someone reclaims their availability, others are forced to interact with the real person rather than an idealized version. This can result in the loss of superficial or parasitic relationships. Friends or partners who benefited from one's constant availability may react with anger, guilt-tripping, or withdrawal. However, these reactions are revealing. They expose which relationships were built on authenticity and which were sustained by convenience or control. Conversely, healthier relationships emerge or deepen. Jung spoke of syzygy, the union of opposites, such as the anima and animus in a psychologically balanced individual. Similarly, when both parties in a relationship are individuated and have healthy boundaries, a more conscious and supportive dynamic is possible. The individual who once sacrificed their time and energy learns to value themselves, and in doing so, invites others to do the same. Creativity and inner life. Availability to others often comes at the cost of availability to oneself. Jung placed a high value on creativity, dreams, and the symbolic life, all of which require silence, solitude, and introspection. In his view, the unconscious communicates through dreams, symbols, and imagination. But these communications are drowned out when one is perpetually engaged with the external world. When someone withdraws their availability, they make room for inner dialogue. They can listen to the voice of the unconscious, explore creative outlets, and engage with life symbolically. Jung encouraged journaling, dream analysis, and active imagination, all practices that require intentional disconnection from the demands of others. In this inner life, individuals often rediscover passions, forgotten goals, or new perspectives. They become creators rather than reactors. The psychological alchemy that Jung described, the transformation of base instincts into higher consciousness, begins in this very space. The fear of solitude and the need for integration. One of the greatest challenges in becoming less available is the fear of solitude. Modern society equates loneliness with failure, but Jung viewed solitude as a necessary crucible for transformation. He famously said, "Loneliness does not come from having no people around you, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important." By retreating from excessive availability, individuals begin to differentiate solitude from isolation. In solitude, one finds inner companionship, discovers their authentic self, and learns to tolerate silence. This fosters psychological resilience and depth. However, Jung did not advocate for permanent withdrawal. He believed in the integration of the inner and outer worlds. The goal is not to become a hermit, but to engage with life from a centered, individuated place. After a period of withdrawal and transformation, the individual returns to the world with a clearer sense of purpose and boundaries. They no longer engage out of obligation but from intentional presence. Conclusion: the liberation of the true self. Carl Jung's work offers profound insight into the transformational power of stopping excessive availability. What may appear on the surface as a selfish or rebellious act is, in fact, a courageous step toward individuation, boundary setting, and self-realization. Through the withdrawal of availability, individuals confront their shadows, reclaim their inner lives, and reshape their relationships. They move from unconscious patterns to conscious choices, from dependency to authenticity. When you stop being available, everything changes is more than a behavioral shift. It is a psychological awakening. It is a return to the self, the archetypal center of personality in Jungian psychology. In honoring the self, individuals find not only peace but also purpose. They learn that availability is a gift, not a given, and in choosing when and how to give it, they honor both themselves and others more deeply.